Okay, welcome to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. I am John Gulliver. I will introduce our speaker and the series. This series of seminars is co-sponsored by the Water Resources Center and the San Antonio Falls Laboratory, both of us at the University of Minnesota, and is based on funding from the Clean Water Council through the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council, State of Minnesota. Our speaker today is Laura Fay, a senior research scientist and program manager in the Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. Laura manages the Cold Climate and Operations Research Laboratory on Montana State's campus, conducting research and third-party testing of deicers, and has conducted and led research in the fields of winter maintenance operations and low field volume roads since 2006. She is, in fact, the foremost researcher in the field of road salt alternatives. And road salt alternatives is where we have to go if we're going to get ourselves out of this chloride mess that we got ourselves into in the northern climates. So that is an important field of research. She's been in it for a while, and it's taken some effort to get us to realize that we really need an alternative to chloride-based salts. Laura served 9 years on the Transportation Research Board Winter Maintenance Committee and is current committee chair for the TRB Low Volume Roads Committee. Laura and I are fellow University of California graduates, but she received her BS degree in Earth Sciences from the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is famous or infamous for not believing in grades. So, to get into graduate school, her admission committee had to read a pile of written evaluations to determine what grades they correspond to. Anyway, she was finally admitted and received an MS degree in Environmental Science and Health from the University of Nevada, Reno. Laura's preeminence in road salt alternatives is evidenced in her appearance in many articles and podcasts on the topic, including an interview with NPR's Morning Edition and an article in Scientific American on new road treatment methods that are better for the environment, basically road salt alternatives. So it's my pleasure to welcome Laura Fay.
Thank you, John. That's quite an introduction, so hopefully I live up to it. So today I'm going to be talking about winter chloride management to reduce the impacts of winter maintenance operations. And I went back and I was able to watch a couple of the past seminars, and there was a lot of really good stormwater data. There was even some data presented on active or former projects on chloride pollution and surface and groundwater. I'm going to be taking the other side. I work a lot with DOTs and local transportation agencies. And so I'm going to be talking about kind of what we do to inform them on how to either have savings or reductions in salt use. There we go. Okay. I'm going to do a quick shameless plug, so I apologize. The Western Transportation Institute is one of the few rural-focused transportation institutes. We're based out of Bozeman, Montana, at Montana State University, and we have a lot of different research focus areas. I happen to run the Cold Climate and Operations group. We have road ecology, we have infrastructure, we have transportation planning. One of my colleagues is here today who telecommutes from the Twin Cities area. But I think a big part of what we do is very practical research, very implementable research. And an important piece of that we focus on is how to convey that information. And so you can see the image on your left. That's made by our graphics artist of every part of the road environment that our office touches when we do a project. So we want this to be usable. We do very little fundamental research. We do almost all applicable research. Okay, so we're talking about winter chloride management. But the important piece of this before you even begin that journey is what's the motivation. So DOTs and local transportation agencies have a primary job of providing safety and mobility. That's their number one job. And then you have to look at what other pressures are they feeling. over the years, in spite of kind of the current funding climate, a lot of these transportation agencies have been losing funding, and they've been asked to treat more lane miles. So they're already under budget constraints. So do they need to find cost savings in operations? Another issue that they're facing is some of these agencies are being regulated, or they know regulations are coming down the pipe. And so they need to either modify operations for that, or they need to start planning for those that are coming down the road. And then ultimately, this all feeds into what we call the triple bottom line, which is this Venn diagram here, where you have the perfect merging of societal impacts, economic impacts, and environmental impacts to create a sustainable operation. Whether or not you actually like the word sustainable, it just means you're doing the best you can. And it considers all of these pieces. So this is a graph that I'm going to show you just to kind of set the stage. This is USGS data of rock salt applied in the US. So it starts from 1975 and it goes just past 2015. And you can see this upward trend in millions of tons of rock salt applied in the US over time. So you can see there's an upward trend that kind of starts in the 90s and with a peak in 2015. And then I tried to pull the newest data and it wasn't up or available. So I went to the Clear Roads website. If you're not familiar with Clear Roads, they are a winter maintenance pool fund where state DOTs pitch in money. Minnesota DOT actually manages that pool fund. So thank you to Minnesota. But on that website, if you are a member, you're asked to annually report a whole bunch of information. Salt used, brine used, equipment, staffing, lane miles, and this is publicly available information, so I pulled it down. So I looked at 2014 to 2024, and I just wanted to see what we were looking at in terms of rock salt use. So in 2014, there were 35 member states, and they reported using about 7.7 million tons of rock salt. So again, that's not all the US states, so it's going to be lower than what's reported here. But then I went out to 2024, and 40 states are now Clear Roads member states, and they're only reporting using 7.3 million tons. So there is this plateauing or reduction in rock salt use by state DOT agencies. So that's good. That makes me feel like a lot of these practices are being implemented and there is change occurring. One interesting piece of this is that the amount of liquid deicer, so salt brine, has increased. So 2014, they were using about 120 million gallons of salt brine, and now they're using almost 150 million gallons of salt brine. And inherently, when you use a liquid, you're putting less salt out in the environment, and you're doing a more proactive approach. So while it's a lot of salt and it's a lot of dosing in the environment, there are some positive trends that we can look towards, at least a plateauing trend, maybe even a reduction. So jumping back to the original topic, we're talking about winter chloride management to reduce chloride loading. When I was thinking about chloride management and what those practices actually are, they are basically just known best management practices. So this is nothing new. This is not gonna shake the industry. This is asking people to evaluate their programs and pick one or two things each season and work on that. I'll provide examples of how calibration alone can really save you money and salt, pre-wetting of materials and plow speed, using the data that your agency's already collecting. So these may seem like very basic things, but sometimes when you're so busy and you're tasked with, oh, another storm, another storm, another storm, you don't have the time to focus on individual incremental improvements in your program. So a lot of what we do with trying to, and I say sell these management pieces, is we actually take the economics of it. It's really easy to say, I can save you money if you change your practice this way. A lot of folks will be like, great, I will do that. If you say, I can reduce your chloride use to save the environment, they're not as excited about it. So there's different ways you can sell this, but you always end up at the same endpoint, which is cost savings and less salt in the environment. So at a workshop similar to this, at a public works event, a gentleman was in a session and they went through in detail how to calibrate trucks and the cost savings that these folks saw. And so he took that back to his shop and he said, I want to try this, just see if I see anything similar. He went in and he asked the plow drivers to turn the knob, set the dial on their spreader, what they normally do, and then they measured that. And they were collecting 500 to 1,200 pounds per lane mile of salt coming out of the back of the truck. Now, a typical application for a moderate snow event, let's say 2 to 3 inches nowadays, is 250 pounds per lane mile. So those application rates that they were using were too high, and they now knew that. So then they calibrated the trucks to apply 250 pounds per lane mile. They went out, they said, do your routes, check back in with me. What do you think? Is it enough? Is it too much? And in that one season alone, just of doing that one calibration, this shop saved $75,000. That $75,000 translates to that quantity of salt not out in the environment that didn't need to be there. So if one shop can do this, imagine if all the shops that aren't calibrating can get on board with that. So this is always kind of the first starting place that we ask people to look at, because it's low-hanging fruit, it's an easy ask, there's great resources online, and you can even have former DOT people come out to your shop and train you on it. Another great study was done in Michigan, and I love this because it was done by the DOT, by actual maintenance folks. So they got a lot of buy-in because they helped produce the results of this. They actually repeated the study and got very similar findings. So what we're looking at here, oh, that's not what I want to do. Over here, we're looking at rock salt application, just dry rock salt at 25 miles per hour for the snowplow and 45 miles per hour. And then over here, we're looking at pre-wet application. So that's adding a liquid to a solid and then putting it on the road. And again, at the top, we're looking at 25 miles per hour for the plow speed versus 45. And what in those graphs, we're looking at those green bars. Those are the ideal placement of where you want the salt to go after it comes out of the back of the truck. And so these guys actually went out with shop vacs and they collected all the salt that was put in these different segments of the roadway to measure how much salt went where. And what you can see is when you drive slow, 25 miles per hour, 90 to 100% of your material stays where you want it to. But if you increase your speed to 45 miles per hour, you can lose up to 30% of that salt just by driving fast. The other piece of this is pre-wetting. Adding that liquid reduces the bounce and scatter. And again, if you pre-wet and you drive slow, it's all going to stay there. But if you pre-wet and you drive 45, you're going to lose still about 25% of the product. So a simple change in operation of getting that plow to drive slower, creating a safe environment on a highway where a plow can drive 25 miles per hour can save you so much salt and reduce that stuff from just being bounced off the road. So for this talk specifically, I wanted to get kind of a newer, fresher perspective on this. So I reached out to some colleagues, and Bryan Pickworth runs operations at Farmington Hills in Michigan, and he responded to my request. And I asked him 3 questions. I said, in your experience, in your opinion, what has been the single best investment of time or resources at your agency to support chloride management? And his #1 response that I kind of took out the emphasis from the email, but was training. You need to be training your staff. And I think we all know that, but the first thing that falls out of a program when your budget is tight, when you don't have staff, when you're busy, is the training events. Especially if you run a once-a-year training event that everyone from the state has to go to. Now you're asking them to travel to the site. It's a lot of effort and a lot of cost. The other piece of this that's really important is buy-in. And I told you that example of calibration. Now, one person not calibrating their truck can throw off the whole shop. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done by these managers to make sure and hold folks accountable that, nope, this is our new change in operation. We're going to be doing this. And sometimes it takes them seeing the folks in the plow next to them or the shop next to them doing it and having success to have that buy-in. But that's critically important. Education on deicers and how they work and the effective environment is critically important. I'm not going to go into that much here, but I'm glad Bryan mentioned it. So the next question was best guess or real numbers. How much have you saved by implementing these practices? Since 2001, he provided me real data. He's seen a 40% reduction in salt use. That's huge. That's amazing. I can tell you that Bryan runs one of the more progressive local agency programs in the country. There's a few other I could point to, but imagine if we could all get on board with even just a few of these practices, how much salt savings we could see. So Bryan even made me a graph. I think he liked it because he got to dork out a little. What we're looking at here is this purple line is rock salt use. So you see that downward trend. Blue line is number of storm events. And the green line is the liquids use, so salt brine. So what you see is a reduction in rock salt, an increase in the use of salt brine, and a fairly consistent number of storms over the time period. And what I really like to see is this convergence right here at the end, where they're really finding that sweet spot for their agency, where they're only using as many solids as they need, they're increasing their liquid use to be efficient, and they're still getting the same number of storm events. So great example. Last question was, what would you do next? You've done all this great work, what do you want to see? And he still said education, he still said research, he still said training. He wants more. One of the great things about Bryan is he's willing to do pilot studies. So if you have an idea or a product or a practice, he's a great person to reach out to. He'll try it. They'll try it with a truck. If it works, great. If not, he'll be honest. He'll give you great feedback. So being willing to be flexible and try things is critically important. We can, as researchers, come up with data and findings, but it's that next step of seeing them implemented and tried and getting that buy-in that's the hard part. So I'm going to provide two examples of state DOT work. There's a ton of great stuff going on. These are just two examples that are fairly mature and that have really grown. Both of these are examples of using the data you're collecting. So Iowa DOT, almost 20 years ago, built a salt dashboard. And what they do is they collect data on how much salt they purchase, how much salt goes to each shed, how much salt gets loaded into each truck, how much salt is applied each storm event. So they have really good numbers on what's going out, where, when, and why. And they link this to the severity of the storm. They link this to the road weather data. And from this, about 2 years ago, they were able to see that they could actually make a system-wide reduction in their application rates. So they put out revised application rates for the entire state DOT based on the fact that they had real data of salt use for different types of storms. So that's a really encouraging use of data. But it takes someone, in this case, Tina Greenfield at Iowa DOT, that really was like, I'm going to sit with this data. I like to work with data. I'm going to build something and we're going to apply it. So another example of a single person imparting huge change in Idaho at the Department of Transportation, a single engineer at a shop said, hey, we collect friction data. What if we use that to determine when roads are safe or not? So they decided that 0.6, that's kind of that value in roadway friction in winter, where above 0.6, you're really safe. Roads have good friction. Below that, you start getting slippery, icy, snowy, slushy. So they said, what if we looked at all of the trucks that are out, the amount of salt they're applying, the effort they're putting in, and where and when they hit that 0.6 number. And so they developed a performance index based on this. It worked so well at the shop that they rolled it out for the entire state, and it's a statewide program now. It also works so well, And to get buy-in, they actually do financial incentives for shops that hit a good percent of 0.6 or higher. So achieving their defined level of service. So imagine if you have one person at the shop holding everyone back from a bonus, there's going to be some pressure for buy-in on that. And it's worked really well. So this is the newer dashboard. I don't think it's live yet. I talked with some folks there, but they're working on kind of adding more bells and whistles to this. And this is the dashboard like the one from Iowa that the users at the DOT can see and they can track at the state level, at the shop level. It's pretty interesting. So again, using the data you're already collecting to make informed decisions. So when I go to public works conferences or shops, you know, it can be overwhelming. You get inundated with all this information. Where do I start? And I always just say, just sit and look at your program. There's probably one thing that's a piece of low-hanging fruit where you could say, I'm going to start here. I'm comfortable starting here. I know what I need to do. Do that. Start there. And the low-hanging fruit that you can always do without a lot of funding is calibration, reducing plow speed, modifying your application rates for the weather conditions. It might seem crazy, but there are people that regardless of the snow event or ice event, always put out the same amount of rock salt. There are guidelines for black ice, for a light snow, for a heavy snow that exist out there. What if you tailored your application rate to that? So again, really low hanging fruit. And then again, using that data that you're already collecting that's out there. So outside of major programmatic changes like that, I wanted to highlight a few kind of creative projects that we've been able to work on. This one was using cheese brine as a liquid deicer. A cheese company out of Colorado approached the DOT and said, we have all this cheese brine, we pay to have it thrown out. So they essentially would evaporate off the liquid and then pay to dispose of the solids that were left behind. They said, hey, it's salty, do you want it? And Colorado said, well, maybe, we're not sure if we're allowed to do that. So they reached out to us and we did quite a bit of testing on it. I'll show you some of that data on the next slide. But we did find there is enough salt in it that there is some de-icing, and something about the cheese making process added some nice additives to it. So it actually provided some corrosion protection. So we were like, okay, this is promising. So we applied for a beneficial use permit through the state, and we did some pre-wet field trials. So they already have their rock salt that they use, and they were adding a liquid mag chloride product to that, which mag chloride works at really cold temperatures. So it's kind of like, it was like using a sledgehammer when a little hammer was needed. So we're like, okay, what if we pre-wet with just this free cheese brine? So on existing routes where they already used pre-wet, they tried this, 2 separate trucks in 2 separate parts of the state. One truck had a wonderful experience. They went out, great success, took photos, said, of course, we'll definitely use this again. I can't believe it's free. This is great. The next truck went and did a pickup, and the whole truck got clogged up. I don't know if you've heard of this, but if you mix different products like calcium chloride and salt brine, you form something that we in the field called rhino snot. It's essentially a really thick, gelatinous, gross thing, and it clogs up everything. And that happened, and it took them a week to clean out the truck. They were so mad. And so then I had all this PR work to do of like, oh no, you're mad at me, can you do this again? They didn't want to do it again. So it was a lot of back and forth. On top of that challenge, the other piece that we knew we were going to encounter was there's really high total phosphorus coming from this product. And Colorado has some of the most stringent total phosphorus levels in the country. So we knew at some point we were going to have to address this. So moving forward, what they said is, okay, if you want us to move forward with using this product, we want what we call a cleaner version of it. We don't want the clogging, we want the phosphorus removed. So the company itself built a bench top scale cleaning system essentially. and they used ferric chloride, and that essentially removed, it flocculated out the phosphorus, and it worked really well. So here's some of the data. So CB raw, that's cheese brine just coming out of the factory. Really high phosphorus, not passing state standards. Pretty good chloride, just under 20 milligrams per liter. When you put a salt brine out, you're targeting 23.3%. So we were pretty close. So we knew we would get some de-icing from that. And then another element that popped was cyanide, and that was concerning to us. Most salts have ferrocyanide added to them, and it's an anti-caking agent. And you probably don't even realize this because it's listed as like a trace element, but it's in almost all salt. And what was happening is as the product was going from where the string cheese is cooled by the salt brine out to the end of the factory pipe, somehow that cyanide was getting concentrated. And this made them really nervous. So they did testing from the front end all the way down, and cyanide was not an issue until we were concentrating the product. So we thought, oh no, this is an issue we get to deal with now. They don't have to deal with. So improved means the total phosphorus was flocked out essentially. So we got the phosphorus down, and then luckily some of the cyanide came out with that. So we were like, okay, we're getting closer. And then having this proof of concept, they started taking all of the cheese brine and dumping it into that outdoor storage tank here. It was huge and it smelled and it was gross, but it helped because we also wanted to evaporate some of the liquid off to help concentrate that salt. If we could make a 23% salt brine without having to add salt or do anything to it, that was going to make this a cheaper product in the end. So the storage tank product, without being treated, really high phosphorus, the salt concentration got exactly where we wanted. For some reason, the cyanide wasn't an issue anymore, great. And then we treated it. And here, again, you're looking at great numbers, good salt content. They could no longer detect phosphorus or cyanide. So we were like, great, let's move forward. We went to the permitting agency. We'd like to use this as an anti-icer. Here's the proof that it could work. The company had already drawn out, worked with engineers to scale up a treatment facility on site so that the DOT could literally pull up to the gate. There was a hose, they could just pull the clean product out. And the companies, well, the permitting agency said, we need samples from the scaled up version before we're gonna approve this. And we said, okay, we understand. The cheese brine company decided they had invested enough time and resources in this and they could not move forward with that. So it felt a little bit like a loss of a project. Like we didn't get the win in the end that we hoped. But if someone is ready, there's a proof of concept, the material is all there, it can be done, and someone could run with this. So I guess that's my takeaway of being okay with the fact that we didn't get to do the field trials of the anti-icing like I hoped. So another project that we have going on right now is using native plants to remediate soil around salt storage facilities. So this is a MDT, a Montana project here. Oh, that's what I wanted to do. This is, that doesn't help. So this is one of the salt storage facilities in Montana. This is pretty typical of what they look like. So as you can imagine, previously they weren't covered. There's still options for the salt to blow away. As the trucks are loaded, salt gets spilled. There are quite a few facilities that they've targeted as elevated or contaminated. And some of them have year-round continuous monitoring because of concerns about ground and surface water. So we said, okay, let's see what we can do. So it's early days. We've identified 14 mostly native, a few non-native plant candidate species. The goal is that those species could grow near the storage facility. They would suck up the salt from the soil water, put it into their above ground leafy material. We could then mow it and remove it from the site. So the end goal is to determine a remediation potential from different plant types. We've collected soil samples from different storage facilities and a couple highway locations. We're going to use that in the greenhouse to kind of bracket the concentrations that we'll need to use. And then this summer into the fall, we're going to do a big greenhouse study testing plant species, watering type, tolerance, to see kind of what the top species are, see if we can use one or maybe even a mix. And then ultimately, if it all works out, we'll do a field trial. Interestingly, I learned yesterday, there's a very similar project going on here. And so it'll be interesting to hear the results of the project here and how we can use those to inform our project. So that's exciting. And then I think this is a really important piece of this discussion. You know, we talk about reducing the amount of chlorides we use as much as we possibly can, but still maintaining safe roads. But what if there is a no salt option? What if there is a no deicer option? And there are some options out there. Heated pavements is one of them. This is a test plot at the Des Moines Airport, and they embedded carbon fiber in concrete, and it's worked really well. They actually pilot tested some at bus stops this last winter, and they presented that at the TRB annual meeting. So very encouraging. It does increase the cost of the pavement, but you are reducing any need for deicer. And in this case, they've actually never had to go out and shovel it. So the amount of savings from the cost of the maintenance of it might offset the actual cost of the pavement itself. Another piece is using brooms. These are commonly used on pedestrian facilities, but in Europe, they're using them on roads. Why can't we start using these on roads? They work really well, especially in specific conditions, as long as the snow is not too heavy or wet. I'm not sure what kind of snow events you guys get out here. We get pretty dry snow in Montana. So for most snow events, this would work great. And then another option is snow fences. A lot of states, I'm not sure how many blowing snow problems you have in Minnesota, Montana, Wyoming, I see a nod in the back. These can be effectively used. They're very cost effective. They can last a long time. You can use standing corn rows. We've seen some examples of waste or extra W beam like guardrail being used, concrete beams. You can be creative. In Wyoming, they just pilot tested solar panel snow fences to power weather stations. So it's the options are unlimited. The drawback is usually if you don't own the land, you have to work with the landowner. So that might be the effort that you put in on that side. Living snow fences are also an option, and they create great habitat and food sources for animals. So with that, I'd like to talk about one thing that's working against us. And as much as I hate to be negative, it's us. We are our own worst enemy. Public expectations are hard to manage. And I guess I'd like to see a show of hands. Who would feel confident driving on the road with the snowplow in that picture? No, 2, 3, 4. What about the one on the right-hand side? Would you feel more confident on that one? No, about the same, not so much. A lot of DOTs have it defined bare and wet or bare and dry, and that is what they have to achieve within a certain amount of time. To do that, the quantity of salt and the amount of resources in terms of personnel hours and equipment is ridiculous to get to there. But if you're comfortable driving, let's say with 2 bare wheel paths, that saves so much in effort and product. And years ago in Minnesota, actually, they did a study and they called out to user groups. They set up some focus groups and they asked people, what type of roads are you confident driving on? What would you be comfortable if we stopped treating the roads? Would you be okay with this? And they actually decided, the communities, that 2 bare wheel paths was sufficient. And so that took some pressure off the DOT to say we need to have perfect roads every time. It allowed them to not throw everything at every storm. Now, years later, about 5 years ago, maybe a little more, Idaho did the same thing. They said, well, it worked in Minnesota, maybe we can reduce our level of service. So we did focus groups for them. We talked to people all over the state. The results there were not as conclusive. They did get some great feedback on what people do and don't like about the DOT, but they were not able to modify operations. But I guess my question to you, to everyone online and here in the audience is, do you need to drive right now? Do you need to go to work? Is your work flexible? Can you leave early if a storm event's coming in? Can you come in late? That alone will save the DOT or local agency so much heartache, because they want those roads open for the ambulance, for the fire truck, for the police. You know, what's critically important and then what's kind of important, you know? Do you need to go to the grocery store? Could you go later? So I try to live by this at home. It doesn't always work. You know, kids need to be picked up. You need to go to the grocery store. But if you can hold out for a little bit, if we all just choose a few storms we can hold out on, it will help in the end. So I do research, as John mentioned, and so I can't leave you without some research ideas. And these are things that I think are big problems that need big brains working on. I always tell students, if you want to become a billionaire, invent the next deicer. We have tapped out what's available on the periodic table for de-icing, so we need some creative thoughts here. We need some out-of-the-box thinking. And then another issue is the laboratory test methods that we use to characterize de-icers are not great at all. It's not fair to the DOT and it's not fair to the de-icer companies. And so actually yesterday we were able to meet and we talked about maybe we come up with a working group to kind of talk through this. Let's come up with some better de-icing methods. Let's get them out there, and it's going to help everyone. The other interesting piece of this is none of these lab tests that we use to test de-icers correlate with field performance. None of them. So how can we do that better? Should we even be doing lab testing, I guess, is a question. One thing that we run into when we talk about non-chlorides is the acetates, formates, agricultural additives. Those all impart BOD, COD, and that's the biggest concern. But if we're doing this in the winter, is this still the biggest concern that we're worried about? So maybe we do some aquatic testing at cold temperatures, and I think some has been done. And so let's get that information out there. Maybe these products aren't as bad as we thought because it's winter. And then just providing information to folks on ideal de-icer type and application rate for conditions. A lot of people don't know when they go to buy a product. Sodium chloride works well to about 15 degrees in the field. If you want to work at colder temperatures, you're going to look at mag or calcium or maybe something with some glycol in it or an acetate or something. But someone might say, oh, the guy at the shop next door uses mag and I think it's great, but they live in a sunny, warm place. And they only need it a little bit. So they probably don't need to buy an expensive mag product. They could probably get away with a different product. Seamless communication between sensor systems. This is something that plagues us. So there is an initiative right now to create a smart plow where the driver drives. That is their job. They drive a safe way in the conditions present, and the plow truck is automated to put out the product at the right application rate where it needs to go. And some pilot tests have been done. The frustrating part is every sensor, every piece of equipment, including applicators, they're all made by different companies and none of them speak directly to each other. Sometimes the units are even different. So it's really hard to integrate data and to process data when you're using these systems that don't communicate. So in this world of programming and AI, maybe there's a way we could do this easily, or maybe we need to ask the vendors, you guys need to work better. You need to work together and help us out here. And then I'll always put in a plug for big data, using the data you have, processing it to make decisions. This picture I've included as an example of communication. This is a road where one old timer drove the route down here, and he knew that it was going to be windy and blowing snow was going to occur. And a newer, younger person drove the route up here and said, it's cold and it's going to be snowy. I'm going to put some liquid out, some liquid de-icer. And the old guy's smartness won because he knew that if he put liquid product out, it was going to cause the snow to stick to the road and create an icy condition. And this is literally a county line right here. that you can see. So imagine if these two counties did training together or talked, communicated. It didn't have to be as stark as this. It's just a clear example of the things. This is recent. This is this last winter. So this isn't an old photo. So with that, I'll leave you with a picture of Montana, and I'll take any questions you might have.
So do we have any questions from inside the room? Yes, in the back there. Oh, yeah. I have to bring the microphone for people online.
Do you know if there have been any studies where they've tried to impact like the public's perception of what's a safe road and like prioritization rather than just going like, do you feel safe on this road? But like, here's information that might help you make a decision about if this road is safe.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that DOTs have different public messaging campaigns that they use, and they put messages out on the variable message boards and things like that. We actually have a project with Clear Roads right now where we're developing public service announcement campaigns. And that one wasn't selected as what they wanted to move forward with. But I do think that is a critical piece of, we need to get the information out, and it needs to come from all levels. So I do think additional work in that area is needed. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a question from online?
Do any of these lessons apply to chloride applications on sidewalks and around multi-unit housing or retail? In these situations, economics seem to be less of a motivator and fear of liability a primary driver.
Yes, great question. All of these apply, but your company that does that service for you needs to care. There needs to be the why for them. Some states have gone to a, I guess it's a no liability. Allison can speak to this probably better on the panel, but if you remove the liability, if you say, if you slip and fall, you can't sue the store, the city, the company, then they can treat to their best ability using best practices. But when that is always in play, they're always going to overtreat. There are some great examples, especially out east, of people tracking salt use of major parking lots, and their salt application rates blow the DOTs out of the water. They are just astronomical. So there are groups now that are working really hard to connect with, they're usually like landscape companies in the summer, winter maintenance in the winter. And they work with them and they teach them, this is how you use liquids. This will actually save your company money. A big problem is that a lot of the contracts are paid out by the amount of salt that's applied. So they're incentivized to apply more material. What if you incentivized by the quality of the treatment instead of the amount of product out there? But it takes a huge change in the contract language and what is and isn't legal in the process. But any of these best practices can be used, yeah.
Yes.
It seemed in the first graph that you showed that there was a pretty distinct increase in salt application starting in like the mid-90s. Is there anything particular that you can attribute that to?
You know, I thought about that when I looked at this, but I didn't go back and kind of look at major things. Not to date myself, I was in high school then. But I don't know, it could be a jump in you know, snowplow technology, like how much salt could be held in the truck. It could be a jump in population or expectations. I don't know, but that would be, if someone wants to look into that, that would be great.
Okay, another question from online.
Wouldn't it be better to plow first and then apply salt? This approach should need less salt as there is less snow depth on the road. What are the logistics of that approach?
So usually, so the school of thought is that we use deicers not to burn through and melt through snow and ice. We use them to break the bond between the snow and ice and the pavement. So if you actually go out and you put a low volume, so like 40 gallons per lane mile, so it's a tiny amount, ahead of the storm event, and then it snows on top of it, removing that with a plow blade is going to be much easier. If you let it snow and then the car drives over it and creates packed snow and ice, the amount of salt that you need to put on it to remove it is significantly more. So it's not only more cost effective to apply ahead of time, but it saves everyone time, money, and less salt. So that's really where liquids really come in handy, is that pre-treatment.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from John.
Great talk. Can you say more about, you gave an example of the friction measurements. I would think, as you just said earlier, is there an incentive to apply more product to meet those friction measurement levels? Is there
That's a great
a
question.
balance in that? Can you say more about that?
When I got that new screenshot of the dashboard that they're working on, that is actually the next internal review that they're doing. They know that they achieved their level of service well now, and now they're going to really take a deep dive into, is that at the expense of more salt use or other things? And I have not gotten a report back from him on that, but that's a fair question, yeah.
Does that answer your question? No. Okay, good. Another question from online.
Could you please clarify the sodium chloride content of salt in cheese brine? It's shown in the table as milligrams per liter, but de-icing brine is typically shown in weight percent.
Yeah. On my part, but that should actually be weight percent. So good catch. Thanks. I'll fix that.
Anybody on? Yes, Ben.
I was curious about the vegetation remediation. I assume that the levels of salt around a storage facility are astronomical compared to what might be even in a roadside. I was just curious if you had any idea how those compare. 'Cause a question I've gotten, in presenting some chloride work is people ask about this. Can we just pull it out of the ground with plants and harvest it? Especially if it collects in ponds or wetlands or
Right.
places where the groundwater is a little closer to the surface. But I never have a good answer for that. So
Right.
I'm just curious if you could talk more about this.
So this project was interesting. They approached us and they basically said that we want you to use plants and we just want you to pull the salt out and just do it. And I was like, we can't just do that. We have to make sure that's even going to work. I can tell you from existing sampling that they have at a few sites that are known sites that have had kind of legacy contamination. I think 1,100 milligrams per liter, pretty high concentrations. Not everywhere, but in isolated locations. And then the ground and surface water, kind of, as you would imagine, it changes seasonally. But there have been some readings that are non-passing for EPA, even at the chronic level. So worst case, 1,000 down to maybe 150. So high enough that there is potential, especially in the soils around there, to do it. But my biggest concern is that they're not like soils. It's gravel. It's old asphalt that's been repurposed. So are these plants even going to grow where the problem is? That's another challenge that we haven't even gotten to yet. So.
Okay, I have another question from online.
Why not mandate winter tire use? Quebec does that. Even non-studded tires have high traction. Cost per car is about $150 per year.
That's a great point. We were talking about that at dinner last night. In the state of Montana, you are allowed to use winter tires, snow tires, chains, what have you, but not every state allows that for various reasons. And I think honestly, a cost-benefit analysis of the cost of winter tires and the impacts to the pavement versus the cost of chloride systemically in the system would probably show that winter tires are more cost-effective, but that hasn't been done yet. So if someone would like to really take a deep dive on that, I think that could really help. I'm sure that the tire industry would support that research, even the pavement groups. So, but yeah, it could be very effective at helping. I don't know if someone from Minnesota wants to comment on that, having not being allowed to use studded tires in the state.
Yeah. Somebody had a comment? Oh, yeah, we don't have many hills, right?
Yeah.
But we get clear roads in the wintertime, very clear.
Okay.
Too clear, actually. So another question from in-house. I have oh, yes, here.
I guess this is a follow-up to the question about salt use kind of going up in the 90s. So I'll pitch this back to you, Laura. One thought that came into my mind in looking at a lot of historical publications from the Federal Highway Administration, it seems like in the 90s, there was a big push to tell DOTs sand is not the way to go. We want to switch to salt away from sand. And then I feel like I've seen that like even in smaller municipal agencies, like their policies will reference these Federal Highway Administration publications from the 90s as part of their justification of why we want to move to salt, and then also more bare pavement policies. So if there, maybe that was a push, do you think that could be part of the driver?
I definitely think that could be, and as you bring that up, I very much agree that could be a contributing factor. You know, certain things also happened around then. A lot of sand use was just typical. It's what people had and what they could afford, but they were having air quality issues sometimes in winter because the sand was getting pulverized and brought up into the air. And so some, like Denver Metro, Salt Lake City, they actually had air quality non-attainment zones because of it. And so they were told you can't sand. So then you get into this tricky situation of now people know you can actually buy or create grit that won't pulverize, that is clean, that is easy to sweep up. But at the time, I don't think they had kind of figured that out yet. But we have been talking a lot the last 2 days about, well, can we just go back to sand? Is that something we can just do? And I think with this newer information, yeah, a lot of operations can. So
Difficult to get them to do that, though.
yeah, right.
It's difficult to get them to move on anything. So we have another question from online.
Yes, this is a design question. It says, snow accumulation in gores often casts meltwater across acceleration and deceleration zones, creating maintenance salting to manage refreeze. How big a role is improving infrastructure design to perform better in winter versus putting the responsibility just on maintenance?
Oh, that's a great question. Is that Connie? I think that's huge. I think if we could holistically work as maintenance crews, designers, bike ped, planners, all together, we could actually create a system that functions for everyone. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the design process is done in, not intentionally, it's just the way it's happened is kind of in a silo. And so when you do have winter maintenance challenges, even like creating places for snow storage, that needs to be thought out in these road design projects. So I think it's critically important, and I support your work, Connie.
Okay,
We have another question from in-house.
Yeah, I guess this is just a comment back to the changes in the 90s. I think a lot of municipalities switched to using less grit and more salt when the NPDES 1987 Clean Water Act kind of revisions came in for non-point source, and then with the Phase 1 cities in 1991. I think those were the triggers that maybe resulted in a lot of places using less grit and more chemical treatment.
Yeah.
They didn't know that chloride was a problem at that time. Right. Okay, another question from online.
If using phytoremediation to extract chloride from roadsides, what will you do with the removed vegetation?
So the goal is that we will mow it, we being the DOT, at the appropriate time while the salt is still stored in the leafy matter, and dispose of it. One thing I've talked about with MDT and actually with some researchers here is, could you then use that product to create another deicer? And so that's something I would like just in the lab level to try. And I learned that there's a biochar facility here, so maybe we could partner with them and see if we can get some pilot material made, and maybe someone like Bryan Pickworth or someone locally is willing to try it out. Let us know how it works. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask your opinion on some of the non-chloride-based salts, the acetates, succinates, formates. I guess they're used in airport runways, and we haven't got them on the roads really, and I'm wondering why.
It's a great question. It mostly comes down to money. Rock salt is still the cheapest, and it probably will be. We have an abundance of it in the US. Some people are even getting it cheaper, shipped up from Chile and places like that. The airport deicers are used because they're non-corrosive, and that's really important in the airport environment. They're sometimes used on bridges. It's worth the cost to use an expensive product on a bridge. But to shift a whole program from using, say, salt brine to potassium acetate would be very expensive. So maybe you want to have some on hand. And the other thing is some of these acetates work at really cold temperatures compared to salt brine. So maybe you want it on hand anyways for really cold events, but primarily it's a cost issue.
So, yeah, I guess I'll ask for another question online.
Can you tell us about any other winter maintenance practices in Europe or other places that might be used here?
Yes, there's a great group called PIARC, and they have a winter group, and they report out on stuff all the time. I feel like we're always learning from what folks specifically in Norway and Sweden are doing. Folks here have been talking about using heated sand. That's something they've been doing for a while. The brooms, they've been using for a while. They're really on the leading edge of using these smart snow plows and testing them. They have a whole fleet of autonomous plows that they use at an airport. So it's great to look to them and see where they're at and what they're doing. And it's funny because when you meet with them at conferences, they're like, oh, we look to you guys for this. And I was like, well, no, but you guys. So we all think we're doing something better, but it's a great opportunity to learn from them. And there are documents that actually report out all the cool things that are going on in Europe. So if you do want to try it, great. The hard part for some of this is getting the actual equipment to do it here in the US. That can be the barrier, is the cost to get it over here, so.
Please thank Laura once again for me.
Welcome back to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. My name is Andy Erickson, and I'm very honored to be able to moderate our panel discussion today. We have a great panel of specialists and experts on the road salt and winter maintenance topic. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and they're each going to share their relation to the topic, and then we're going to dive into your questions. So please have your questions ready for in the room, as well as online. Post your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we will answer as many of those as we can today. To start, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. On my right, your far left, we have Allison Madison, who is the program manager at the Wisconsin Saltwise. So Allison, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to the topic today?
Yeah, so first, thanks, Andy, for having me, and thanks everybody here and in the audience online. So I work statewide in Wisconsin. I'm based in Madison at the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, but I work statewide with our county highway departments, local municipalities, also private contractors, some with advocacy groups and other like watershed-based groups, to accelerate the adoption of all the best practices that Laura was talking about. And we are seeing incredible reductions. I think you shared the story of Bryan Pickworth from Farmington Hills, and Bryan well. And we're seeing a lot of agencies as well as private contractors drop salt use 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 60, 70%. For instance, I can mention Jefferson County in southeastern Wisconsin is a really big leader known across Wisconsin, also even I'd say nationally. They were mentioned multiple times at the Grand Rapids National Snow Conference that I attended just last month. And their typical salt applications 20 years ago were 20 to 30 tons per lane mile each winter. And now they're down under 5 consistently. So it's just really remarkable. And so I want to push back, John, on your comment saying it's hard to get people to do things differently. And I would say, think about, we need to think more about kind of who's doing this work and all the real world barriers and things that they're working up against, and understand that if someone was going to come here to your lab and tell you you need to do things differently. I've never worked in a lab before, but I've been thinking about this problem and doing some research, and I'm going to tell you, no, you're using the wrong tools. I'm not going to give you any money to change those tools, but you got to do this other thing, right? So I think that a really big part of this is going to the practitioners and respecting them for the knowledge that they have and their expertise, and bringing them to the table in the conversation and having them work with us and work everybody that's on the public side, on the private side together. We have a problem, and how do we get from A to B? And we have incredible innovators working in public works and people that really take pride in what they do, and safety, as Laura said, and as we recognize, is paramount for them. But once you get people to recognize the implications of salt use, we have incredible champions, I know, in Wisconsin and across the country that are just doing really innovative work. So
That's great, Allison. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Our next panelist is Bryan Gruidl, who is the Water Resources Manager at the City of Bloomington in Minnesota. Bryan, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to the topic today?
Great. Thank you, Andy. So as Andy mentioned, I'm the Water Resources Manager at the City of Bloomington in Minnesota. And so I am involved with the city's MS4 permitting. And so we are, I come at it maybe from a little different angle. So from the water resources side of things, like what are we seeing out there in our water bodies, and how do we best manage that? And I'm fortunate enough to work with a dedicated maintenance staff who are very into trying new things and understand the issues that we're having out there. And we work really well together to try everything from pre-wetting to brine. We've got our own brine maker and things of that nature. And so I come at it from not only working for a municipality who is responsible for maintaining several hundred miles of roads, but also as a water resource professional, trying to do what's best for the environment out there.
That's wonderful, Bryan. Thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Chandi McCracken-Holm, who is the Smart Salting Training Administrator at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Chandi, from your experience and perspective, how do you relate to our topic?
Yeah, and it's Chandi.
Chandi, my bad.
Sorry. At the state level, I do want to thank you very much for being here and for your talk. And a lot of what I heard today is a lot of what we are talking about in our smart salting trainings that we have at the MPCA. And it's about talking about expectations is one of the things we hear from the plow drivers, and liability from those property managers. And we're really all about giving them all these different tools that you're looking at. And so it's great to hear some of that research that is being done, because we always get questions about, oh, what about these byproducts from sugar beets or cheese brine or pickle brine? And and it's just trying to give these plow drivers all the tools that we can. And so that kind of research is so important, so that we can spread that and give them the opportunities to reduce their salt, save money, ideally, getting free product from byproducts if we can. But of course, it does take money in the front end, having to do some of that stuff. And so that's, there's kind of a lot of give and take. You have to find that balance. And that's really what we're just looking to do, is especially prevention to begin with. We talked about design and mechanical removal, and that's where we want to start for sure. But then we realize that safety is still our priority, and so still finding those other alternatives that can also help protect the environment. And I really appreciated what you said about, well, maybe if it's low flow, it's not such a big deal using different this product in the winter. And it's so, and I've always, and we've been thinking about, well, maybe it is appropriate to use it in some places, like if it's not near a water body and it will degrade before it gets there. And so looking at those kinds of things and choosing different products by the water bodies that are more safe for them. But there's always an environmental effect when you're using chemicals.
That's great. Thank you, Chandi. Thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist is Shannon Holland, who's the Salt Sustainability Coordinator at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. So thank you so much for being here. What's your relation to our topic today?
First, thank you guys for inviting me to be here. It was a really interesting topic. A lot of what I've seen today or saw today, MnDOT focuses on, we're right hand in hand with every single slide on your presentation. So recently we had the push for calibration. We have done training statewide to all of our calibrators. We've made sure that every single truck statewide is calibrated. The liquids, we've increased our liquids significantly over the past probably 4 or 5 years, just increasing. The more that we're studying it, the more that we're learning it works better. It's just, so we're really amping up our liquid usage with the state. And then as far as like the potassium acetate, which we have done projects on that as well in the past. So we actually did go chloride free. We went chloride free within the Duluth area on certain routes. And we learned that potassium acetate was not the way to go. It's not only not cost effective, it still has environmental impacts, especially during spring runoff. A lot of the testing that was done in Michigan, like you see how salt scatters across a roadway, whether it's dry material or pre-wet. We actually went through and repeated that just a couple of years ago here at MnDOT, and then we also tested out different chute designs. So across the state of Minnesota, each truck has a chute right off the spinner. We tested to see how each chute performs at different speed, and then a dry chemical versus a slurry or a pre-wet chemical. And then we took that knowledge and we actually went out in the wintertime, kind of like how you said lab testing isn't always ideal. We wanted to see, it's great to learn what it does in the summertime, 90-degree day in August to see how it spreads across the road. But let's actually try this in the middle of winter. So we have a test facility that we rent out, and we're actually able to recreate realistic environment as far as traffic flow. We do the friction sensors as well. We're collecting the friction data. So throughout your presentation, I just seen a lot of what MnDOT does. So it's a great presentation.
That's wonderful. Thank you for being here, Shannon. I will not ask for Laura's relation to the topic. She gave the keynote and set the stage for our discussion today. So now I'm ready to start taking questions. Who has a question for our panel of experts today? Don't be shy. There we go.
I'm going to, I guess, start by just asking, so earlier sweepers were mentioned as a technology piece, and Shannon just mentioned some other technology, whether chute design and shape. What other technology is currently available or being developed that hasn't been discussed yet, that's kind of on the market or maybe coming, whether it's, I don't know, I think about some of the automated salt distribution things on bridges or different plow shapes or articulating plows or that sort of stuff. Is there anything that we haven't discussed yet?
Sure, I'll jump in right away here. I think two things that come to mind. Well, one, Laura did mention pre-wet salt, but that can look like a whole variety of things. I think on a couple of slides that Laura had, it said like maybe 7 gallons per ton, which now is like very, very low. We've got a lot of agencies that are pushing that up to 15 gallons per ton, 20 gallons per ton, and then even beyond, which requires a lot of changes to equipment or just radically different equipment, and to get up to 40, 50, 60 gallons of liquid per ton of rock salt. So what's coming out then, instead of just like spritzing a little bit of brine on the salt, which can help it, stick, right, reduce that bounce and scatter, we have almost a slurry kind of coming out, more like oatmeal, right? And that sticks there, and with all the brine, it's activated, it starts working immediately. So we're seeing agencies dial way back on those granular salt application rates from that, I think you mentioned like 250, right, pounds per lane mile, down to 100 pounds per lane mile, sometimes even 50 pounds per lane mile. And then again, to be able to do that, you might have to make some other modifications to trucks, or have a different truck that has a smaller auger size that you can actually have even distribution at those lower application rates. And then we can go all the way to the extreme of zero granular and just liquid. So Jefferson County that I mentioned earlier has some direct liquid, so liquid only routes. Sheboygan County in Wisconsin piloted a liquid only route last winter, and they're expanding that this winter. So again, when that material change, I mean, it's a lot involved in that transition, right? You need to have a lot more capacity to make liquids. You have to have the liquid capacity on your trucks. You have to start looking at satellite, tanks and storage across the county. And we're seeing that both from the county level. I don't know any municipalities off the top of my head that are doing liquid only, but I do know contractors that are doing liquid only. And that's, I'd say, like 90% of the time liquid only. I have a webinar with Jefferson County's highway commissioner speaking about their kind of transition into these direct liquid routes. And in that study, 90% of the time direct liquid meant less salt, but you get that 10% or 5% of storms where the type of precipitation, the precipitation rate means if you're doing liquid only, you end up putting more salt down. So it's not like we can go away from granular completely, but we're seeing some huge reductions, like on the private side, 60, 70% reductions in salt use, not uncommon by going to liquids.
Other thoughts?
Some of the technology I can speak of is like icebreakers. I don't know if anyone here has heard of them. It goes on the front of a plow, and it looks like a steel wheel drum with spikes out of it. So that's only used during compacted ice. You don't want to take it out on any roadway. If it's a nice roadway, you don't want that. But when we get compaction on the roadway, it really helps to break open that ice so we can get the liquids to go through and actually penetrate down to the pavement to break that bond. And then also different cutting edge technologies. So different blades they wear different, they work differently, and just researching all the different cutting edges that are out there.
And just to build on that, literally every part of winter maintenance has more. There's always more that can be done. Even just the type of plow, where it's located. There's the front plow, there's a V plow, there's a wing plow, there's an underbelly plow, and they all serve different unique purposes depending on the road type. There's been great success with the underbelly plows that are under them because you have the weight of the plow pushing down on it. So again, there's so much work going on. And if you have an opportunity to go to a winter maintenance conference and walk the floor, you will just be enamored with all the cool new technology that people are developing. So
to kind of jump onto that too, like it's so that with the plow blades, they're moving to more sectional blades, right, instead of a straight blade. So it can kind of change with like the contours of the pavement and also the plow materials. So we're seeing a lot of rubberized blades or rubber blades with a carbide cutting edge. And so that's working almost like a squeegee going down the roadway. And then you can't use those everywhere, right? If your pavement's not in good condition, it can chew it up really quickly. But some agencies are saying, yeah, we're going to keep kind of working to keep that road surface in a great condition, and then those are really beneficial, and then we're able to dial back, because it's always, so you start doing this thing to get more mechanical removal, or you start putting brine down, but then are you dialing back those application rates on the back end?
One of the other things that we're using, all of our plow trucks are outfitted with temperature sensors on them, so we do pretty closely monitor the temperature of the pavement, which helps our maintenance crews kind of really dial in at what that application rate is going to be. So not only what the temperature of the pavement is, at the current moment, but what is it anticipated to be later in the day. And then some of the conversations we're having is, how do we better automate our, AVL system to be able to maybe intake some of that information and start to automate some of that stuff, because if you've ever been in a plow truck, there is a lot going on in there. And so if we can help the drivers stay safe, drive the truck, and try to automate some of that stuff, we should see some significant benefit from that.
Thoughts? Let's take an online question, please.
Loras County line example stands out to me. Is it staff turnover? Is it a lack of training or cooperation across those maintenance agencies? Whose role is it to institutionalize this often highly local knowledge to improve safety, encourage more appropriate maintenance actions, and likely reduce overall salt use?
Yeah, I think that's a very clear example of, people have knowledge out of experience, and we need to capture that knowledge before they retire. And this gentleman had been driving a plow for well over 30 years and had so much experience. He just knew. He knew where the problems were, when it was going to occur. So in the training, as new people are onboarded, they need to be side by side with these people in the truck, out in the field, pointing out, at this ditch, we have this problem because the wind blows here. It's so specific to the route that I think if there was a ingrained way to make sure that knowledge was getting passed down within an organization, it would really help. Yeah.
Anybody else? Any comments?
I think with that, there is a lot of institutional knowledge that is really helpful, but there's also some of the older folks that tend to get a little stuck in their ways that aren't necessarily adapting some of these newer salting practices. And so, one of the things that we've done as a chloride program is we've also put requirements as of 2020 in our municipal separate storm sewer system permits, MS4 permits, is that there are chloride requirements in there. And so they are getting the training. That doesn't mean everybody's following it, but they are required to do annual training for all their winter maintenance staff. And so they can come to our smart salting trainings. They can also do their own trainings, and we're not sure what that necessarily means. They do have certain requirements that they have to cover in those trainings, but we've also created refresher trainings that are just slightly shorter trainings that they can take in between our 5-year certification to help meet those MS4 permits. And so we are trying to get regular training for at least those facilities where we can.
I'd also like to jump in and say, when I'm doing trainings, I like to acknowledge that there's both the art and the science of snow fighting. So as researchers, you guys are used to very controlled environments, right? We just want to change one variable. And out there in the real world, there are so many variables. Bryan talked about, just recognizing a plow driver, you've got how much information kind of coming at you, and we're putting more and more into the trucks and at the fingertips of these operators, which is amazing, right? And then they're also driving down roadways in adverse conditions with people speeding up around them, and we're throwing more tools that they can use, but there's just every storm can act a little differently, right? And trying to take all of that in to understand, is liquid, right, the right choice for this or not, or kind of what might be coming. There's just a lot going on there.
That's great. We have a question in the room.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you all. I was sitting here thinking about lane miles. We were talking a lot about that, whether it be state Department of Transportation or county highway or even city lane miles. But what we didn't talk about is the other big elephant in the room, impervious surface, private parking lots. So besides limited liability that Allison and I talked a little about over breakfast, what about the science, education, training, application, policy that you can think about we should be exploring through research or whatever for the private impervious surface and everything we just talked about this morning?
I can speak really quickly to that. There are people that are focused on this. There's an entire nonprofit based out of the East Coast. A gentleman did his master's on this, a late in life master's per se. And basically what he had a landscape company and did winter operations, and he was determined to make a change. So he actually goes out and he trains these private companies on how to implement these best practices. And he works with them to do the trainings, find the cost savings, and he actually reported some of this data to us as a winter maintenance research group at TRB one year. And it was astounding the volume of salt they were applying, but also the volume of reduction once they implemented these best practices. So I don't know what the solution is, but I do think whether it's like the large companies that own these lots or that are required to maintain them, maybe it's written into the contract, maybe the liability is removed. I'm not sure how to like force it, but these technologies do work, and there's great examples. Allison probably, do you know some examples? There's a few that are very clear of one storm they tried solids, one storm they tried liquids, and they saved hundreds of dollars. And that's hundreds of dollars they're gonna get paid anyways. So that goes into their pocket instead of towards salt, so.
Other thoughts?
I can jump in. So, I mean, as far as like the private development and all of that goes, I do believe that the liability, at least here in Minnesota, certainly has something to do with that. A lot of the local watersheds and WMOs across at least the metro here have looked into that quite a bit. And it does seem like when you talk to the contractors that the liability component of it is one of the driving forces behind that. But I would go back to Laura's presentation a little bit as well when she was showing that like heated pavement. I mean, there are other options that are out there. I think we're still learning like what their best implementation is, but one thought that we've had is, let's identify some high pedestrian zones or some ADA parking stalls, like where is the salt being applied most, and maybe selectively use heated pavements or potentially other BMPs and try to reduce our reliance on salt in that fashion.
So I do work with SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association. That's the like private industry trade organization for winter maintenance contractors. So they have, magazines, they've got annual conference, actually again in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a popular place these days. That's coming up in June. And then last year, for the first time, we worked to create a more local, a Midwest Snow and Ice Conference. So that was held in southeastern Wisconsin. We're going to have it again in September of this year. We had some folks from Minnesota that came over to that. So this is mostly people on the private side, mostly those winter maintenance contractors. There are also sometimes school districts, universities, and even some municipalities that are a part of that work as well. And I'm trying to, like Phil Sexton, who Laura mentioned, kind of like infuse these conversations around that triple bottom line. And there are, yes, contracts out there that are time and material. So the contractor is incentivized to put more material down because that's more money, right? There are other ways to write contracts that are seasonal contracts, maybe with a ceiling, involved, or event-based contracts. So yes, there's a lot of work to be done kind of with contractors and education. And I think probably a lot of that is supporting SIMA to do that. So it's coming kind of from within the industry. And we have a lot of successes in the Madison area and Eau Claire, up around kind of the Fox Valleys, where we have different individual contractors that are making a lot of changes, moving towards the liquids, and that are seeing, if they write their contracts correctly, that's a lot of money back in their pockets, actually. But, there is learning, there's new equipment, like how do you kind of get over that hurdle of that initial kind of capital investment? I would say kind of an immediate action to take would be for you to talk to your facilities management team to maybe do a little self-assessment. I mean, if any of you walk into a building that you work at, what does the salt use look like there in the winter, right? And we were talking about this at lunch, and there are a lot of state and municipal agencies that contract out their salting, and salt is overapplied. So can you start at your own facility, take a look at that contract, figure out what needs to change there, change that contract and have that help to be a model contract, and then we can work with contractors, they want to get paid. So how can we incentivize them to do better salting?
Yeah, at the MPCA, not only do we have a roads smart salting training, but also parking lots and sidewalks for those contractors. But what actually came out of that training is we developed the property management training, because those contractors kept getting a call from the managers, owners saying, you haven't put down enough salt. We don't hear the crunch under our feet. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily safe. And so we've created this property management training in order to educate those property managers or owners and those people who are hiring the contractors on what is safe and why chloride is harmful to begin with. And so we are trying to reach that audience, and we still have a long ways to go because there's a lot of property managers out there, right? And so that's often one of our smaller classes, but we're kind of dependent on the public having more of trying to get that education and understand that, you don't have to hear that crunch of salt under your feet in order to be safe. And we're not risking safety by telling you to use these practices.
Other thoughts? I actually have a question. I want to build on something you just said, Chandi. So property managers. My question is, what voices are pressuring applicants to put down more salt? And how do we better engage them in this conversation? Property managers is one. Are there other voices that we hear from to say, let's put more down? How do we engage them better to understand the full picture?
You have a hand in the audience.
Apparently Ross is one of those voices.
Answer your question.
Go ahead.
I can jump in. So, we get a lot of pressure just from the general public. So again, I'm at the local level. And so if, the residents can't get out of their street in the morning to get to work, our maintenance crew is usually going to hear about it. And so that perception of, what is attainable and, what residents expect versus maybe what we should be doing, I think there's quite a separation in that. And so I think that's probably where our biggest influence comes from, because we, as much as we try to use data and use data-driven decisions, we do have a reactive arm of what we do at the local level as well.
I think another group, really broadly, that we need to bring to the table are both local, regional, state level elected officials, so that they can understand kind of the severity of this problem and where we're headed, and see that there are some solutions right now, but a lot of them do require some investments, right? So can we put some money out there to support the adoption of these best practices now, right? And not just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, and that is another audience that we are targeting at the MPCA. We have a Smart Salting for Community Leaders workshop. It's just a shorter 2-hour workshop because we still have so much content. And we are trying to get those elected officials, any of those community leaders that have a say. It can be homeowners associations, lake associations, just getting them to understand the severity of the problem and the sources and what they can do. It's a little bit more about policy and ordinances that they could implement, so that higher level to give that support to those who are doing the work.
I would just have to kind of repeat, just like cities, townships, everyone else, it's public perception. The public is a driving force, and it could also be an internal force as an operator. If you're out on your route and you're seeing people in the ditch, that also drives a factor. And it's just, you have to realize that you can't drive for everyone either, that sometimes people just need to slow down, drive safer, and they won't be in the ditch, because people even in the summertime go in the ditch, so it's not always the roadway's condition.
Hey, y'all. Laura put maybe a research need or an area of opportunity up on the screen that I'd like to hear the panelists respond to. And that was maybe around the area of performance management and information management. I've heard Allison and Bryan describe, a very information-rich environment in the plow cab for folks. What sort of struggles and opportunities do you see in terms of, getting that, operator level data linked up with the community, level of service expectations through the information flows in the organization and the dashboarding of some of the performance management? Where are we on that? Where do you see the opportunities?
I can actually jump in really quick while people are formulating their thoughts. I can see their wheels spinning. So some DOTs actually have Track-A-Plow, which is an online thing. Most have a lag, like a 5-minute lag, so you can't go out and hound the plow driver. But it allows you to see where they are, where they're going, where they've been. And then that is a great interface tool, because then people don't call. They say, oh, I know where to look to get the information of when they're going to be able to treat my road. That is super helpful. A lot of people are afraid to do it for liability reasons, and so there's kind of a mixed bag, but I do know quite a lot of agencies that have done it are happy with it. That's all I'll say on
that. I could say MnDOT is rich in data. We have a lot of data within our systems. We have, within the side of the roads, we have road weather information systems that help track pavement conditions, weather, forecast, everything. Within the plows, we have AVLs, so we are able to track all 850 plow trucks statewide. There isn't a single plow truck out there that doesn't have an AVL system in it. And in each of them plow trucks, the operator is given a tool. It's a maintenance decision support system. So they can go ahead and within the plow, they can look up their forecast, current conditions, forecasted pavement conditions. And then we take all the sander data, which comes back into our system. So everything that truck is laying within every inch of the road, we know exactly how much is put down on the roadway, on what roadway. And then you are actually able to see our plow trucks within 511. So if you pull up the MN 511 website, you can actually see where our plows are at as well. So
I'd jump in and say, so we've got MnDOT up here, right? All the information, and then you make your way down, right? Like, how much wealth is there in a community, right? Like, do you even have computer controls in your truck or not, right? So like some trucks, you can punch in literally that I want 250 pounds per lane mile, and I want 20 gallons per ton, right? And as the truck slows down, everything slows down. The truck stops, and there's no salt going down. And then you have old school manual trucks where you can go, 1, 2, 3, and hopefully it's calibrated, right? So you know what 1 means. And then when you're driving and you're slowing down, it's still putting it out at the same rate, right? So now actually your rate's gone up per lane mile. And when you stop, if you don't turn everything off, it's still salting, right? So there's just huge opportunity, but everything has a price tag, right? So like Laura said, budgets are real, right? And we have to make those decisions around, do I invest in this technology? Do I, feel like this is a good choice and I'm going to get that ROI? One of the things that we're seeing a lot of excitement around is pavement temperature sensors that are in the road. So it's not just in the cab, but you've got that information out there and you can understand like, okay, are we getting below, 32 here? Do we need to go out and anti-ice, or is it too cold? Do we not want to anti-ice, and kind of make some of those choices? That's both on the roadside as well as like private contractors having little remote cameras and sensors so they know pavement temperature at a parking lot and kind of what the conditions are there as well.
So most, if not all, of our plow trucks are also outfitted with AVL, and so there is, a whole bunch of data that they're intaking. I think one of the things that when I talk with our maintenance staff about, managing that data is, each event is its own event and has its own characteristics. And so what's going out on the road is highly variable. So, I mean, if we're talking freezing rain, that's, very different than, a smaller storm or a smaller snow event. And so I think there's some reluctancy maybe to put that out there, because I think our maintenance staff doesn't want to be, misrepresented that, hey, you're, putting a whole bunch of salt out on the road this time, and then you're not putting any salt out on this time. And the variability amongst that, I guess, is what I hear from the maintenance staff as kind of just people don't understand the difference between events and the salting rates that are done out there.
Other thoughts?
I'll just add one other thing, and it's kind of along the lines of communication. Some agencies have found a lot of success in, right before the snow season starts, sending out a social media campaign of this is the level of service that each road type gets, and showing pictures and maybe even a neighborhood, this is what represents level 4 service or something. That just to remind people, our primary effort is going to be the highway. Our secondary effort is going to be the state roads, and then we're going to work our way down. You can't expect me to have your neighborhood road cleared within 2 hours of the snow event, and also not berm you in, So I think a lot of it is just clearly letting the public know what the expectation should be.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where we've coddled a lot of folks, and in Wauwatosa, we salt alleyways as well, down to bare pavement,
All right, we've taken a couple in-person questions. Let's take one or two online. I think we have some online.
Is anyone aware of similar research or changes that might work for large parking lots?
I can speak to the parking lot thing a little bit. So, plow drivers don't like all the obstacles that are in parking lots. And so, when you think about designing your parking lot, and different cities have different rules and regulations around parking lots and parking lot islands and things of that nature, but being intentional about how the design goes about parking lots, understanding where that snow is going to get pushed, giving the contractors the ability to make long runs and push that snow will go a long way to getting the parking lots clear and less dependent on salt, if they can clear the parking lots, efficiently and completely.
I think also with parking lots, it's understanding, do we need to clear that entire parking lot, right, over the course of the winter? Can we prioritize a piece of it and use, some of it can just be snow storage. Getting back to, I think we talked about, like better plow blades or broom tools. I mean, I've been seeing contractors go out recently with leaf blowers if it's really light, dry snow, and just blow it off. And then again, going back to liquids, where sometimes it's just that liquid only afterwards, maybe like 100 gallons an acre, but that's one treatment. And I think one thing to consider when we're sometimes, I think, throw contractors under the bus, but they might go out and do like one salting. And yes, the rate is quite a bit higher than what we see on roads, but how many times did that truck go around on the same stretch of highway at that 250 pounds a lane mile, right? If you do that 4 times, well, now you're at 1,000, pounds a lane mile.
Other thoughts? Parking lots. One thing I just want to actually latch on to, snow storage within parking lots, especially if that's on the upland side of that parking lot, upslope side, makes a great space to street sweep afterwards in the spring, right? And catch up all that collection, all that material that's in those snow piles. So that gets to design. So I love that we're talking about taking things we're observing from the maintenance side, trying to feed that back into better design of our infrastructure and our parking lots. Let's take a question in person.
Okay, so this is going to start with a little story. I've been thinking quite a bit about chloride and parking lots and road salt and parking lots and seeing parking lots.
And so we started contacting European manufacturers about their wet heated sand solutions. So they may use wet heated sand for many things. And I was surprised to find out that the United States is one of the few countries that salt parking lots. Most of Canada doesn't salt their parking lot. In Europe, they don't salt parking lots. So when I was talking to these companies, these are European companies, so I was talking to these companies, they didn't have any equipment to use because they don't salt parking lots. And so I think what we need to do, if we're gonna apply water heated sand in our parking lot, which would be great to rough up the surface and take care of liability, we need to convince the European manufacturers that we actually salt parking lots and we'd like to stop salting parking lots. So my question for the panel is there a way that we can do that? Because I haven't figured that out.
So I know with the slurry spreader technology, that actually came from Europe. And there was one manufacturer that developed a prototype and it got pretty popular over there. And there was a scan tour. So some winter maintenance folks from the US got to go over to Europe and learn from all these different countries what they're doing. And that was one of the things they pulled back. Getting those first pieces of equipment bought and brought to the US was very expensive. Once they realized there was a market, now you can get them. They're still the more expensive brand in the US. There are other US-based brands, but it's become a whole market now. So I think it's actually going and meeting with them and bringing one piece back of the equipment, trying it out, showing that it works. It takes some legwork, but I think it's possible.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's really about showing people that it does work and it works in our environment. I mean, we might have different situations than they do over in Europe as well. And so we got to kind of consider all of those. I mean, there is a whole town in Holland, Michigan that's entirely heated pavement in their downtown area. And it's like those kinds of things. It's like, okay, they've shown it works. And I think in Minnesota, I've seen it implemented in much smaller scale, like in front of a city hall or something like that. And so it's just really getting more of those examples out there and showing people what can work. And but getting it over here is the first thing. And I think we are doing a better job of that. We're reaching out across and learning about more things. And I think technology has helped that a lot with the SALT Symposium now in Minnesota is now worldwide. Anybody can attend and we have speakers from all those different places. And so just, I think more of that is gonna be what helps.
Yeah, I'd piggyback off that and say there's a lot of excitement when you get practitioners together to talk about what are you doing and how have you been changing things. Okay, you've had that headache and I did too, and I tried this and that did not work at all. And then we reversed and tried something else. So in Wisconsin, I host over a dozen winter maintenance equipment open houses each year in the fall. During that kind of winter readiness trainings, both with municipalities and contractors and kind of joint collaborations where people bring in equipment and they're sharing it, with their neighbors. Counties sometimes are more like the big brother, just like, Minnesota DOT has all the fancy new toys and like a smaller muni is going to buy that, right? But you can get excited. You can start figuring out how I can tinker with what I've got and start moving in that direction. So I think getting that, excitement around the tools and the technologies and then like Chandi said, like everybody can't always show up in person, but like the power of that virtual learning. So I host a monthly webinar series where we have practitioners share their stories about what's working at their agencies. And then sometimes we see a year or two later the same thing happening in another place. And it's, I took that idea and I followed up and I went, across state and I visited this facility, whether it be universities, visiting other universities or, munis visiting munis. So trying to just spread the energy around this work.
So I mean, as far as, I don't know, just thinking about the newer technology, it's, having some examples, I think that, here at least locally in Minnesota, I know we have learned a lot from other cities, counties, the DOT. And so getting some of these new technologies implemented as an example and trying to get that information out there and learn from others. So, we're interested and excited to try to move forward with some new things. And if there's, support out there and, new things that we should be doing, we're either, in some instances have been able to implement some of those things ourselves, or, work with others to, see if we can actually bring that to fruition and implement them at a wider scale.
I can actually speak from the research perspective a little bit in that, we've tried to bring new technology either from other places or from research into market. And, Bryan kind of highlighted the hurdles, at least that we've tripped over, is a lot of times there are willing partners. There are people that are willing to try things, but it's a money hurdle or it's some other infrastructure hurdle that they have to do a bunch of other changes in order to make that possible as a pilot in this location or within that jurisdiction. So, whether it's funding or bigger infrastructure grant requests, those are some of the hurdles we're going to have to overcome if we're going to try to get some of these big changes with some technologies that are not small changes, but big changes. All right, that was in person, I believe. We got to go online.
What are the barriers to going back to using more sand other than inertia?
Well, since I'm the water resources guy up here, the easy one is that we don't have big sand piles in our storm ponds anymore with not putting sand on the road. So in the spring, if your sweeper doesn't get out there in time, all that sand ends up in your pond and it makes it a lot harder to recover. And so I don't know if that's necessarily a barrier, but we're certainly seeing a lot less sediment in our ponds across town.
Public perception, sand means we're getting traction, but it's not the bare pavement people have become used to.
I was going to kind of repeat, one of the barriers is going to be the sweeping, being able to actually get the equipment out there to go sweep before it hits the stormwater runoff.
Any other barriers?
And equipment, we've transitioned to put salt down, and to go and put sand down can mean different equipment.
Yeah, big capital.
Yep.
Back into it. All right, we are almost out of time. We'll take one more in-person question, and then we'll do our key takeaways.
Thank you all. So I've heard numbers like 70% reduction and all that, and that's great. But is that just slowing the time down that it takes to get to that destination that we don't want to get to? And if so, what is the target? How much salt can we put down and we say, that's okay, we're sustainable now, we're not going to get to that destination? Does anybody know a number like that?
You should go down the line. No. My answer is no. We don't know. That would be a great project to be researched. In the days that I've been here, we've talked a lot about this, and there's the legacy piece of chloride that's already out there, and potentially chloride that could be re-released. And so I think it would be a great long-term research project if someone could get out there and do that.
I also don't know what that number is. But I will say that, up to date, we've done a lot of low salt campaigning, and that's great, right? Only put out the amount of salt in the environment that's required to get to your level of service. But, the other stance on it is being more intentional about design, being more intentional about things that we put out in the environment. We talked about parking lots briefly, but taking winter into consideration when we are reconstructing things, when we are making improvements, when we're developing things, put winter into the conversation. And so I guess that would be my challenge to a lot of folks out there, is start talking about winter when you're talking about design. So when we talk about stormwater runoff and things of that nature, we're primarily focused on spring, summer, and fall, right? But what happens to all that meltwater from the snow pile that's at the top end of the parking lot that runs across the parking lot all spring and then requires somebody to go out there and salt it on an almost daily basis? And so I think there are some low-hanging fruit, things that we can do out there to further limit our salt, but low salt will only take us so far. And if we continue to design things with a reliance on salt for our winter maintenance technique, we're only going to get so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously it's a very multifaceted, right, problem, a wicked problem, right? And there are solutions right now that we are just stupidly not implementing, right? And we all just kind of walk by it and look the other way or walk over it, right? Crunch over it. So there are things right now I feel like we need to be implementing these basic best practices across the board, like no questions asked, right? Then there are in the next, year or 5 years or 10 years, as you redesign or repave, parking lots, kind of how are we doing that differently, right? And then there's the work for you guys. What are those alternative deicers we can start, getting out there in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Because zero salt is the sustainable solution, right? But that's not for next year. That's not for 5 years. But hopefully we get there.
Yeah, at the MPCA, we try to put numbers on it. We have a chloride limit now for wastewater treatment plants that are putting chloride in from our water softening and industries. And I mean, that's not good enough. That's not, I mean, it's slow. It's just slowing it down at this point. And so we're trying to at least try to even things out. One of the things we mentioned in our training is about 70% of the chloride stays where it's at. It's not all washing downstream like we would like to think it could. And I mean, because it is good, it's getting into our groundwater and then flowing to our streams. And I think there was another talk on that a couple months ago, actually. And so really seeing a reversal is gonna be a very, very long road. Because right now there is some indications from some USGS monitoring that things have leveled off a little bit more. And I think that is definitely a credit to all the work that is being done here that we're talking about in past 20 years. And so we just got to keep working towards that and getting people to understand what is necessary and what's not and looking for that new technology.
Oh, I can just say that, we're not going to get there within the next 5 years as well, but we are taking the steps to actually reduce the chlorides right now by adding more liquids and getting the material to stay on the roadway, not into our ditches, just by keeping it on the center line. We're not tossing it into the 10-foot shoulder, which then washes out into the ground. But yeah, like zero salt's a goal maybe 100 years from now, but I don't see it anytime in our near future.
Any other thoughts?
All right, well, time flies when you're having fun, but we have to get to our key takeaways and close out our seminar today. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give key takeaways. So whether they want to highlight something we've said that we want to reemphasize, if there's something we didn't get to cover that you want to mention before we close, we're going to ask for your key takeaways. And I'm going to start just like we did our introductions. Allison, you get the first. What are your key takeaways today?
So I do want to retract. I said stupidly not doing these things, but there are real reasons, right, why we do the things we do. So it's identifying what are those barriers, right, and how do we address those. And the policy piece is a really huge part of it. In Germany, in many municipalities, it's illegal to put salt down. It is prohibited to put salt down on parking lots and sidewalks. You can get a $10,000 to $50,000 euro fine. So not dollar, 50,000 euro fine for that. So there are policies in place there, right? Not really palatable today here, right? But how do we do that? That is a zero salt kind of policy. So I think it's addressing that back to those elected officials. How do we get there? I think every one of us needs to be talking about salt every day, not just, at work, not just in these rooms, but out and about as we, are talking with the quote unquote general public. That's all of us. And Winter Salt Week, I would promote, is a big part of that. I've run that the last several years. It's a virtual webinar week in the end of January. Got partners from over a dozen states that use that week to promote best practices and education and awareness around the impacts of salt use. And I would say one last kind of pitch also for the Wisconsin Saltways webinar series. So it's all on YouTube, and then the webinars are archived on YouTube, and a couple that people might be interested in, like one topic that didn't come up yet. I guess we were talking about cheese brine as an alternative. There is a county in Wisconsin, Greene County, that does use cheese brine from a creamery just down the road and use that in their pre-wet. But there's also a facility, the USDA Forest Products Lab in Madison, that reclaims salt brine from their water softeners. And so they're taking that salt brine out of the waste stream, which otherwise would be heading downstream, and they're using that as their deicer. So they're still putting salt down in parking lots, but all that salt has come out of the waste stream that would otherwise just pass through the wastewater treatment plant.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Allison. Bryan, your key takeaways today.
So I certainly think that managing public perception is important. So I think education continues to be important. I think when we're educating, it's also really important to educate on the why. So when we talk to maintenance staff, ensuring that we're not just asking them to do all of these things, but that they understand the why we're asking them to do these things. I think that goes a long way. I participated in Allison's Winter Salt Week this past winter, so I would highly encourage those out there to become involved in that. Additionally, again, looking at ways that we can further reduce our reliance on salt, whether that's through design, intentional maintenance practices, things of that nature. What can we do to reduce our reliance on salt for winter maintenance? So those are, kind of my key takeaways.
That's great.
Thank you, Bryan. Chandi, what are your key takeaways today?
Well, I mean, I have to echo, it is a lot about public perception and education and letting people know exactly why chloride is harmful. It's an invisible permanent pollutant, and people don't realize that. They probably think once it's gone, it just disappears, it's not a big deal if it gets into the water. And so with that, it's like, okay, so what can you do specifically to help us? And that is, wear proper footwear or drive carefully or don't drive. And a lot of that goes with it. And then it's actually been kind of exciting because we've gotten a lot more requests recently. It's like, is there something that I can hand out to this business owner who has piles of salt out front? And it's really exciting to hear that. And we've actually recently redesigned it. And it's focusing on, okay, physical removal, shovel early and often, and then choose if salt's even needed. Is it still slippery out there or not? And then choosing, okay, maybe sand would be better in this case, or maybe we do need salt because the temperatures are warm enough for that, and then sweeping that up afterwards and maybe reusing it. And so just those little things that people can do individually, but then when it comes to our roads, we talked about driving safe or winter tires and things like that, but just continuing that technology, ideally, that is not dependent on salt. That'll clear the roads so we don't have to use it.
Wonderful, Chandi. Thank you so much. Shannon, your key takeaways.
My key takeaways, just like everyone else, is going to be the training, the outreach, and then also research. If we're able to research different alternative ways of doing things, we can do them better. And then with that, we actually provide training and outreach to whether it's the public or internal or cities or anywhere. Just knowledge is power. So being able to talk to someone and tell them what you know, and then they're able to talk to someone and tell them, and it gets down the line. And then collaborating too. I know typically, we have MnDOT and the MPCA sitting right next to each other. That's not really a relationship you tend to think works out, but having that open relationship with MPCA, learning what they do, and then putting it into what we do, and then working together to kind of collaborate on stuff. So that's some key takeaways.
Wonderful, Shannon. Thank you so much. Laura, you get the final words. What are
All
your
right,
key
I'll close
takeaways?
it out. Well, I agree with everything, and I want to echo that, and I'll just speak to something that maybe is more researchy focused, is a lot of great research is done, and then it's put on a shelf, or it lives in some mysterious corner of the web. And so just as a request to funding agencies, if you could build in a technology transfer component, that would allow this work to get out there. You could build in on-site trainings, you could build in attendance of a workshop like this or something like that, because there is so much good work that some of us know about, some of us don't, and you have to go find it. It's hard to find sometimes, so.
Wonderful. These are great key takeaways. Well, that will conclude our Minnesota Stormwater Seminar series for this month. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us either in person or online. I encourage you to check out our website and our schedule for future Minnesota Stormwater Seminar series. But before we break, I'm going to ask you to help me thank Laura, our speaker, and our panelists for our seminar today.